You're on now.
I'm on. Hey, Zoomland. Sorry about that. Okay. So, property purgatory. I usually begin with a video by Ben Shapiro. But as we know, technology will not save us. It will let us down. And we can't play the video. So you'll have to have his face and my voice. And what he's saying premises property purgatory beautifully, because he's saying sea level rise. Yeah, sea level rise is coming. You know, and in this scenario where sea level rise is going up and up and up, say, you know, sea level rise raises by 10 meters in 100 years. Let's just say that happens. It's no big deal. People will just sell their houses and move. I'll give you a moment. People will just sell their houses and move. Okay, Ben. Oh, come on. Ah, here's the quote. You think that people aren't just going to sell their homes and move? Well, no, Ben, I don't. Because to whom are they going to sell their houses to if it's underwater? With what insurance? And with what finance in general? So at this point, we get to my PhD project, which is property purgatory. This very tricky situation of oncoming foreseeable damage due to sea level rise, in my instance, and a position of stuckness for people in these homes, because to whom are they going to sell to? With what insurance are they going to recover any form of loss? And what sort of access do they have in general to recovery, fund recovery in order to fund relocation? And so I'm the son of a theologian. He's an academic at a very prestigious university. And he would tell his students that you gotta approach things, see, judge, act, liberation theology. I'm sure we're all very on board with it. And I thought, I don't have that much time for this presentation, so what I'll do to identify property purgatory is I'll give you as a fact, and then I'll make a value judgment about the fact, and then act/ask a question and discuss some of the ideas that this all engages. So, here's a picture I drew of property purgatory a couple of years ago. And we're going to go into this. I just thought I'd show it early on because it sort of graphically represents what I'm talking about. You're tied to your house. You've got climate change causing a stressor on your insurance, which is tied to your mortgage, which is tied to your house. Now, climate change isn't the only stressor in of itself onto your tie with your house, because as we know, we're all very climate change literate people here. Climate change is a slow onset stressor, as well as having an accumulative effect on the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. So you've got this sort of double hook, double peril of climate change stresses on your property. Now, okay, see, judge, act. My fact is that sea level rise equals foreseeable damage to property. Now, in every other presentation, I literally jump around the room and go, sea level rise equals foreseeable damage to property. I don't have enough time to do that. You'll all get the idea very quickly. My value judgment, and this is where Ben and I differ, is that this is bad. It's not a good thing. So, okay, let's do it again. Sea level rise equals foreseeable damage to property. This is bad. Okay. My question, how will those affected recover their loss and move? So let's start at the beginning. My favorite musical tells me that's the best place to start. And we know that sea level rise is going to be quite bad. And we know this. It's going to happen. It's not like earthquake risk where there's an element of spontaneity. Sea level rise will cause damage to property. I like to focus on the sort of 2050, 2060 projection because that's the time that I'll be my dad's age. So this is very much within my lifetime that we're talking about. And the projections are that during this time period, what is currently seen as a 1 in 100 year storm event becomes about 1 in 2. So what's currently a 1% chance of happening becomes a 50% chance of happening by about 2050, 2060, with about 30 centimeters of sea level rise. Now, as you can see, as time goes on, this gets worse. So sea level rise equals foreseeable damage to property. Good, 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 good. Okay. Now, to get an idea of the scale, we don't need to look very far back. The 2015 floods in Dunedin are an example of a 1 in 100 year event. And with 30 centimeters of sea level rise, as the projections suggest for 2050, 2060, we're looking at those happening a lot more often. This is bad. Okay. Yeah. And this affects Dunedin. I don't need to go too much into this, but this is local. This is very close to home. And there's a significant socioeconomic element to this, but we're going to get into it. So this is bad. And this is already happening, and we're already starting to see these instances of the foreseeable damage caused by sea level rise having an impact on people's capacity to move away from danger zones. So in Waitati, there's a person who was being continually flooded and was receiving insurance payments. However, her insurance payments kept going up and up and up. The insurer was responding to the increasing recognition of exposure of her property. And eventually, her insurer was like, see ya, I'm done. And they withdrew her policy. And so this person was stuck in a property that was uninsurable and without the ability to recover funds in order to move. And this is property purgatory, this nervous waiting position for an inevitable outcome, because sea level rise equals foreseeable damage to property. That's what we're talking about here, and that's what my PhD is about. This period of time where there's been a recognition of exposure either by an insurance company, by a territorial authority like a local council or a regional council that has delineated a risk line and affected property, causing this ratcheting of either insurance premiums going up or withdrawing, but starting property owners along this path of loss. So I also have boxes with arrows. Go lawyers, we can do fancy science stuff too. Okay. This is the process. You've got a recognition of exposure. As I said, insurance company, local council, etc. What Ben Shapiro in his video that you didn't see is saying is that people just move. But the recognition of exposure has an impact on your property value. So he's here, which is great. He's nearly there. But I'm here. And so what I'm looking at is this relationship in between the likely economic loss as the property becomes slowly more and more uninsurable, and these various stages of loss that the person might experience. Not necessarily in this order. It could happen that a storm just wipes a property out and the insurance withdraws. So you've got various iterations of loss, and there's currently no defined access to a recovery scheme to fund relocation for people in this circumstance, or at least very little, which means people are stuck. People are stuck in this wee gap. So my question is, cool, what do we do? This seems very bad. And what my PhD is about is it's looking at, okay, what are the questions we need to ask in order to really make some traction, transport pun, with this topic. And so I'm primarily with the law faculty, and looking at, okay, how have local councils reacted to natural hazards and delineating responsibility in the past? And what could local councils, even central government, do in order to respond to this thing? Because it will become more and more of an issue, not just a legal issue, but also a practical issue. The more people you have in this situation, the less avoidable it becomes. And so this is just some of the questions that I've come up with to sort of throw out to you all. What's the practical role of legal councils? A more legal doctrinal question: what are the implications in legal doctrine concerning the relationship between individual and local authorities? This teases into, what about individual responsibility? It goes into Lisa's point about, well, at what point do we place expectations upon people to avail themselves of the risk? Moral hazards. What about existing compensation schemes for property damages? What's the role of the EQC? How do we think about the ACC in this circumstance? You know, New Zealand's very good and quite unique, I'd say, in terms of collectivizing risk. And what does this mean for New Zealand's response to people in property purgatory? And so there's another question of, can a person in property purgatory sue a local council for any of the stages of loss? And I don't know. And I don't think I'm gonna know by the end of my PhD either. And I'm okay with that. I don't wanna be that guy. And we're seeing these questions start to play out already. We're seeing it in coastal communities around the country. For example, on the Kapiti Coast, we've got recognition of exposure in that the district council set land information memoranda that was denoting hazard. It was denoting the potential impact that sea level rise was going to have. The residents weren't happy. Their housing prices fell overnight and property values were down. And so they made a claim in court. And so you can see from this that district councils and local councils, they're not the bad guys here. They're stuck in this pretty tricky bind where, when they want to take a very preemptive, anticipatory approach in terms of trying to wean people off coastal properties that are going to be exposed in anticipation of situations like property purgatory, there are consequences to this. And there are wider implications as well. How bad is it to have no defined access to loss recovery? Is it a really big deal? Can it be something that we can just absorb into existing legal doctrine? Who's affected is another big deal. We're looking and we're talking about different demographics of people in coastal housing, people with second and third homes on fancy beaches. I couldn't give you an example because I'm not from New Zealand long enough. And we're also talking about people in lower socioeconomic backgrounds. And those people have different access to litigation and to loss recovery methods. My question is, what does a responsible approach look like? I like to root my thinking in this idea of responsibility. So, to quote Ben, you think that people aren't just gonna sell their homes and move? To quote me, other Ben, no. It's much more complicated than that. These people are in property purgatory, so what should we do? Thanks for listening.